And that's an interesting thing if you look from organizational dynamics. That on one hand you have a building strategy to build something up that you really need. And on the other hand you have a risk containment system avoiding that you get into a crisis losing everything that you have been building up. For organizations that's a very difficult thing to do at the same time. That socialization and qualification are moving out of the system and selection is moving in. And that's basically where Michael Young and the rise of meritocracy comes in. That selection processes in education will become stronger and stronger and harsher and harsher.
But looking at leadership that's inflected with a sense of social justice, that's a core kind of value, public value within Scottish education, part of this nation building. Donald Dewar, the first Minister of Education, is the first publication he wrote for the Scottish Parliament was Social Justice, a Scotland where everybody matters.
If the role of education in the selection process becomes more important, where do we get our authority for being? People probably not really mind being selected, but they really don't want to be selected in an unfair or incompetent way. So the first dilemma would be if selection becomes more important than education. And I think where does education get its license to operate, its mandate to be more selective?
I want to rethink headship. That's what one of the things we're grappling with is how do you rethink headship preparation? I'm not going to go through these, but we have got two extant and well regarded by those who engage with it and those who support people in it. So there are two programmes that are running there within Scotland. Graduates from that have got a decent success rate in moving into headship, you know, and they feel that they are gaining substantially from these programmes. You know, ideas about it's changed me, it's transformational, it's made me confident, it's made me now want to be a head teacher, it's really supported me into head teacher.
The question that a lot of teachers are posing is, okay, you're giving us this voice, you're giving us this autonomy, but really is it in return for compliance with accountability? Is that what it's all about? And I suppose in some jurisdictions the concern is that this has led to what Aileen has referred to before as managerial professionalism, where actually there's been less autonomy and just increased standardisation and increased accountability. And I suppose that is the fear in the Irish context.
How do we deal with the stuff below the surface? Are we able to talk with people about you're a good learner, you're a clever mind, but you have a character problem, boy. We are not going to graduate. You don't get a license to operate in education.
I think one of the key issues, and this is of relevance to this conference, is we're talking about models of continuing professional learning and development. And if we're looking at models, we quite frequently, and Aileen will come on to this, she's looked at it in her article, in her first article, and in her keynote, I think, this afternoon, is that we're tending to look in an Anglo-centric way. We're tending to look at a lot of the models which come from the US, from the UK, from Australia, from New Zealand, from these type of societies and cultures. And there's a danger of policy borrowing, there's a danger of adopting cultural models and then trying to implant them within different cultures and different societies. And I think we have to be very careful, A, not to patronise that we can do this in other societies and other cultures, and B, that we need to look at where these other cultures and societies are coming from in terms of continuing professional learning.
There's a tendency to identify in the literature context, circumstances, situations that are typically conducive to professional development. And that's what people often think they're doing when they say, this is how it occurs. It occurs by people going on a trip together, team building, rather than sitting in a workshop. And that's what they say, and that's how they explain it, but that doesn't tell us anything, really. So there's this preoccupation with describing context.
What we've come to understand so far, so what we're mapping out is we're mapping out the policy, the theoretical perspective and the practice across these two networks, which I will explain. So what we've come to appreciate so far, and it's definitely work in progress, is that the two areas of social justice and educational leadership are both inherently complex and messy. Okay? And then when you put them together as social justice leadership, it becomes even more complex and even more messy. But despite that, there's a huge international interest, a growing international interest in social justice leadership.
It's not the same as understanding in detail the complex, potentially interactive functional relationships of learning. We're talking about professional development here, how people learn something different. Fails, in my view, to shed light on this cognitive sequence that constitutes individuals' professional development at the micro level, which is key to understanding and explaining the disparity and the variance in people's responses to stimuli and cues that have the potential to lead to their professional development at the micro level.
Bowen, what would you say the cultural differences are from your perception? What are the cultural issues that if we were to go there we would need to be aware of if we were engaging in continuing professional learning?
There are two major aspects. One is the system itself, which is now pressing very hard on the cultural diversity. The most important thing is if we are able to get into the system, then cultural diversity or cultural differences can be easily tackled. Secondly, we have sometimes equity not on a knowledge base, but equity on gender basis, caste basis, class basis. And Constitution is providing that support to all those such categories.
We're investigating these key areas. The construct and concept of social justice leadership, the policy expectations and the practice and perception of social justice leaders themselves, and look at the practice of social justice and then how we can actually develop models of professional learning to support school leaders taking this forward, both in terms of formal leadership preparation, but also in terms of supporting ongoing development of head teachers as well.
We're talking about huge numbers of children, young people, and the teachers who work with them. So mobilising and bringing that whole sector up to speed, if you like, if we can call it that, is a massive challenge, is a massive task. And that's why the state's involvement is actually important. But then we reach into the political dimension and we have to ask questions about where the politicians want the schools and want the teachers to be going. And then it becomes complicated.
Models of teacher professional development have not matched the complexity of the process we seek to promote. They too are saying, you know, the models are okay, but they're really not getting to the nitty-gritty. Well, we've got Clark and Hollingsworth, who highlight the limitations of superficial and oversimplistic path models of teacher professional development, just as I've done with Laura Decimo's path model. And they have come up with their own interconnected model of teacher professional growth.
Janet's paper earlier on, where you talked about looked at what it is the doctors are doing in terms of developing that professional identity, was very much what we've been doing for the teacher educators who are involved in our programme, and that developing the opportunity for people to come together and then move things forward to discuss that as a professional construct. I think there is significant overlap here.
We have a lot of things which we can share with the people abroad. So both ways, leadership concept of our teachers, our education system, and the leadership concept of developed countries, it can be brought together and then something new can be decided for the developing or the emerging societies. It will be very useful. Directly going from one side, it may not be considered as a cascade matter once again. So sharing of the knowledge, sharing of the techniques from both sides of the leadership people can facilitate, of course, the one thing.
So a leadership forum.
And our current problem is how to really move on and create a flexible COP within the HEI structure. You know, we're aware that we have specific meetings, particularly the strategy group meeting with the heads, which has acted as a focal point for those heads to come together and talk to us about their changing landscape. And we wondered, as we move from non-credit modules into credit modules as a way in of getting staff, teachers who are working full-time, busy, don't feel like they can kind of take on the full-term 3-year commitment of an MA education and level 7 study. As we move from non-credit to credit to get those in, we've noticed that we've talked a lot about the nature of CPD today, with that whole nature of CPD to PPD, and we wondered just what other possibilities there were out there, what other things you've found and you've been doing.
I would like to say thank you to ipda, to my colleagues in ipda Scotland, for making this possible. I've always believed and I've always learned by collaborating with others, and I hope now I can pass on the mantle and support my colleagues as they go forward to collaborate together. Thank you very much, genuinely, for the ipda Fellowship. I have to say, you know, in the university system, they're all very keen on esteem and indicators. But for me, this is a marker of this is a serious professional association. It has that sense of not just academia, but it is about the profession, it is about practice, it is about policy.